Welcome to the Antiscam Report, the podcast that keeps you informed on the latest scams and frauds that threaten your finances and your peace of mind. I'm Dan, your host, and joining me as always is Paul the Bulldog. Paul, how are you doing today?
Hey, I'm doing great, Dan. As always, I'm on the lookout for the latest scams to sink my teeth into. What's on today's agenda?
Glad you're doing well, because today I want to talk about a very important topic. Protecting seniors from scams. It's become a word I don't use lightly in these days and times, an epidemic. Then, later, we'll discuss the psychology behind scams and why some fall victim to them. And after all that, we will explore what can be done politically to stop scams. But first, I believe you have the news for us this week?
That's right, Dan. To kick things off, I wanted to highlight some recent political news regarding scams. As many know, at the height of the pandemic, a great deal of fraudulent claims were made to unemployment and the pandemic loan programs. Now it finally seems the Biden administration is holding criminals to account. In a USA Today article from March 2nd, they report the Biden administration announced a series of measures to track down and punish fraudsters who scammed billions that were supposed to provide relief to Americans during the pandemic. President Biden pledged $1.6 billion to increase law enforcement manpower and start new programs that will be used to prosecute scammers, prevent fraud, and provide assistance to victims of identity theft. Now, Gene Sperling, a Biden senior advisor who is overseeing the implementation, said, "We want to not only capture them and get their funds, but we want to send a signal to them that even if they run, they cannot hide."
It seems particularly horrible for scammers to steal money for people out of work due to a pandemic which has killed almost 7 million people around the world. I truly hope justice is served here.
I couldn't agree more. Thankfully, one of the main points of this new initiative are plans calling for the creation of DOJ strike forces that will include U.S. attorneys and other law enforcement officials to investigate COVID relief fraud and help recover stolen tax dollars. The presidential initiative includes a number of other good measures that may begin to turn the tide of this battle.
It goes to show that not only can individuals be scammed, but in this case, every single American was stolen from. In other news, I have a somewhat depressing story out of Pennsylvania. An 81-year-old woman lost nearly $100K after believing a scammer who said her grandchild was in danger.
Wow, yikes. How does this keep happening, Dan?
Well, far too many ways. The victim in this case got a call back in late February. The call was from a woman who said she was the victim's granddaughter and needed money to get out of jail. The scammer said she had been in a crash that was her fault and police had found drugs in her vehicle. She asked for help with legal fees and to get her record expunged. The woman told her grandma that she would send all the money back once the matter had been resolved. So, the elderly woman began mailing cash and wiring payments to various locations across the country. Some transactions were rejected by employees and officials who recognized them as suspicious. Some notified the poor grandma, and one entity even called police. But a series of phone calls from the scammers over 30 days convinced the 81-year-old that her granddaughter was truly in trouble. So, the victim ignored warnings that she was being scammed, and according to the district attorney.
Yeesh. Yeah, folks, if you ever receive a call claiming to be from a grandchild or any family member, call that family member directly or enlist other family members to do so. Call employers, friends, colleagues. This grandchild scam, unfortunately, is one of the most common ones. If the protections we just discussed from the Biden administration had already been in place, this probably could have been prevented.
Right. There's lots of ways we can act to help our loved ones. But what about seniors who may not have loved ones to help, or when the people helping them are actually in on the scam? It's a big world, and unfortunately, not everybody is friendly. We as a society need to do more to prevent scams and punish scammers.
So, I think that's actually a good place to segue into today's discussion. Seniors are often the target of scammers because they are more vulnerable and may not be as tech savvy as younger generations.
Exactly. Scammers use a variety of tactics to try to take advantage of seniors, from posing as Medicare representatives to tech support scams. We'll talk more about these two types of scams in particular a little later on. The saddest part might be that it's the people who can least afford it losing money.
And it's not just about losing money. Scams can lead to identity theft, which can have long lasting consequences and ruin lives.
That they can. The victim might not even know they've been turned into some scammer's personal ATM. That's why it's so important for seniors and their families to be aware of the most common scams and to take steps to protect themselves.
So let's start by talking about why seniors are particularly vulnerable to scams.
Well, one reason is that seniors may be more trusting and polite than younger generations. They might not know to hang up or might not act on the impulse before some scammer reels them in. Scammers know this and will try to take advantage of it.
And remember, they may be more isolated and lonely in general, which can make them more susceptible to these scams who pose as friends or companions.
That's right. And as you recently mentioned, seniors may not be as tech savvy as younger generations, so they may be more likely to fall for tech related scams. Let's not forget about cognitive decline. As we age, even the best of us may experience changes in memory and decision making abilities, which can make it easier for scammers to manipulate us. I watched my own grandmother go through it, and a once strong college educated woman became a shell of herself.
I'm sorry to hear that, Dan. You're exactly right. Seniors are often targeted by scammers because they tend to be more trusting and have a nest egg that scammers want to access. And due to unfamiliarity with technology, it can be very confusing for some. Worst of all, seniors may be isolated or, like you said, have cognitive impairment, making them very easy targets. This is actually what happened to my stepdad, too. Despite being a mathematician, once his dementia took root, he was as innocent and trusting as a young child, which the scammers used to their great advantage.
Sorry to hear about your stepdad, but that's a good point, Paul. Unfortunately, there are many scammers targeting seniors. These criminals seek out those who are least able to protect themselves on purpose. According to the FBI, over $3 billion is lost each year from Americans to scams. Not just seniors, but seniors represent more than their unfair share.
3 billion? Okay, wow, that's a lot. That's a lot more than I even realized. So, what are some of the scams that seniors just need to be aware of then?
It is a lot of money. Anyway, one of the most common scams is the Medicare scam. Scammers will call seniors and tell them they need to update their Medicare information or risk losing their coverage. And, of course, they'll ask for personal information like social security numbers and bank account numbers. But Medicare will never call you and ask for that information. Medicare will always do the important things in person or through the U.S. mail.
Exactly. That's right. And with the pandemic, that kind of fraud is even more prevalent now.
Sad to see people being taken advantage of in these trying times. Another common scam is the tech support scam. Scammers will call or email seniors pretending to be from a well-known tech company like Microsoft or Google or something and tell them their computer is infected with a virus. Then they'll offer to fix it for a fee. But, of course, they're really not fixing anything. They're just stealing the senior's money.
I find that particularly despicable. And what's really insidious, if I recall correctly, this is also when they'll insert remote access software onto the senior's PC, right?
Yes, that's right. Well, I mean, it's very wrong, but you are correct. Scammers will actually insert their own bad files, which we call malware, right? Mal for bad, whereas in software. So, This malware is used to remotely access your computer. The first thing they look to obtain on there are your online banking credentials and financial information for further scams and thefts. The fact the malware is there can make it easier for other scammers to come along and loot whatever little you have left.
It's so awful. It's really so awful. And then, of course, there's the classic tried and true lottery and sweepstakes scams. These are very similar to those Nigerian prince scams, where scammers tell seniors that they've won a big prize, but they need to pay a fee to collect it.
And, of course, there is no prize. It's all a dirty trick to get the seniors' money.
Yeah, these scams can be really devastating to seniors, both financially and emotionally. Folks, never pay the fee.
Absolutely, don't pay it. So, let's move on to some tips for seniors and their families on how to protect themselves. It is really important for seniors and their families to be aware of these scams and take these steps to protect themselves. One tip is to screen calls and avoid answering calls from unknown numbers. Your phone or your phone company can even screen calls from suspicious numbers for you, because scammers often use robocalls or spoofed numbers to trick seniors into answering.
That's right, Dan. And it's generally a good idea to avoid unsolicited offers. Scammers may pretend to offer a service or product or something free, but in reality, it's just a ploy to get personal information or money.
I'm afraid that's right. If it looks too good to be true, it usually isn't. If a senior does fall victim to a scam, it's important to report it to the authorities. The FBI has a website with information on common fraud schemes targeting seniors and tips for reporting scams.
Absolutely. And there are also resources available to help seniors and their families from the National Council on Aging. They have a list of the top 10 scams that currently target seniors, along with tips for protecting yourself. And of course, the AARP has information on common scams targeting the elderly.
Those are great resources, Paul, especially the AARP, because they do a lot for seniors. But it's important for everyone to be aware of these scams and to take steps to protect themselves and their loved ones. One important tip is to be aware of red flags that may indicate a scam, such as pressure to act quickly, requests for payment by wire transfer or gift cards, and unsolicited offers.
That's right. Folks should always be cautious when sharing personal information, especially social security numbers and financial info. Seniors should also be wary of unexpected emails or any sort of phone message asking them for personal information or any message containing a suspicious link.
It's also important for seniors to talk to their loved ones about these scams and enlist their help in protecting themselves. Not only can family members help screen calls, but they can monitor financial accounts and be aware of any unusual activity.
And finally, seniors should take advantage of the free resources that can help protect themselves, such as the Fraud Watch Network from AARP and the Senior Medicare Patrol Program. Now, links for all these resources and more can be found in the video description below or on our website.
Those are some great tips, Paul. Thank you. It's very important for seniors and their families to stay informed and to take steps to protect themselves and each other from scams.
Absolutely, Dan. And if anyone suspects that they may have been a victim of a scam, they should report it to the authorities right away. The more people who report these scams, the better the authorities will be able to combat them. By working together, we can help protect seniors and ensure that they're not taken advantage of by scammers. So thanks, guys, for joining us. We're going to take a brief break, hear from our sponsors, and we'll be right back. The sponsor of today's episode is you. Antiscam, as a 527 organization, is funded completely by donation from viewers like you. So thank you. And now, back to the show.
Welcome back. In this segment, We will be diving into the fascinating topic of the methods of scammers and why we fall for their tricks. Let's explore the concept of social engineering and how scammers use it to manipulate their victims.
All right, Dan. So, talk to me about psychology of scammers. They're slick, they're smart, and they know how to push people's buttons. But how do they do it?
Well, Paul, scammers use these social engineering techniques to gain the confidence of or provoke the fears of their victims. Social engineering is a whole academic discipline, but to sum it up, it's the use of psychological manipulation to trick people into giving up sensitive information or taking actions they wouldn't otherwise take.
That's honestly pretty crafty and devious. What are their main tactics, though? How do they make it happen?
There are a few common tactics that scammers use. One is called phishing, where scammers send emails or messages that look like they're from a legitimate source, like a bank or a social media platform. They then ask the victim to click a link or provide sensitive information, like their login credentials.
It's pretty sneaky and insidious. As I understand it, this is a major problem tech companies have grappled with for a while. Something we definitely need to discuss in the future. But for now, what are some other tactics?
Another tactic is called pretexting, where scammers pretend to be someone they're not in order to gain access to sensitive information. They might pose as an IT technician and ask for the victim's login credentials in order to fix a problem with their computer.
I see. Okay, so these guys really know how to work the system. But what's their logic? Why do they target specific groups of people?
Scammers target specific groups because they know what vulnerabilities and insecurities those groups have. Bad people have always preyed on the weak. It's our job as a society and as individuals to put a stop to it. Scammers often target elderly people who may be more trusting and less familiar with technology.
Yeah, that's really despicable. So can you give us a real life example of social engineering that might help our viewers understand the true scope of this problem?
Sure. A well known example is the 2013 Target data breach, where hackers gained access to the personal information of millions of Target customers. The hackers used a phishing email to gain access to the network, which some unsuspecting employee opened, and from there, they were able to steal the data.
Yeah, that's insane. And what's crazier is it's only gotten worse since then. That raises the question in my mind, what can a regular person do to protect themselves?
You're right. More and more money is stolen every year by these scammers. The best way to protect yourself from social engineering is to be vigilant and skeptical. Don't click on links or provide sensitive information unless you're absolutely sure it's a legitimate request. And always double check the source of any email or message before responding. If you're not sure how to do that, ask someone you know and trust to help you out.
Great advice, Dan. So, I guess it can be beneficial to be a salty skeptic sometimes. Well, one way or another, we gotta stay one step ahead of these scammers. Alright, this has been really informative. Folks, we will be back in just 1 minute with more on psychology of scams. But first, another quick word from today's sponsor. The sponsor of today's episode is you. Antiscam, as a 527 organization, is funded completely by donation from viewers like you. So thank you. And now, back to the show. Welcome back to the Antiscam Report. In our previous segment, we talked a bit about tactics scammers take to manipulate their victims. Now, we'll be discussing why we are susceptible to these scams and how to protect ourselves further.
That's right, Paul. It's important to understand the techniques behind these scams in order to better protect ourselves.
So Dan, Why are our minds vulnerable to these scams? How come it's so easy for us to fall for this stuff?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, scammers use persuasive tactics to exploit our natural human instincts, such as our desire to help others, our fear of missing out, or our need for validation. These tactics can be very effective in convincing us to give up our personal information or
Hmm.
send money to scammers. Even very smart people can fall victim to appeals to their emotions.
That's really interesting. It's always been fascinating to me that people can be pushed to act against their own self interests. So, can you give the folks at home some specific examples of these persuasive tactics that scammers use?
Sure thing. Some common tactics include creating a sense of urgency, such as by using emotional appeals or by offering unrealistic rewards. For example, a scammer might create a fake emergency situation and ask the victim to send money right away to help a loved one in need, like the poor grandma we mentioned in our first segment.
Ah, right. Yes, that's a dirty trick, Dan. But it makes sense. The less time we have to think and the more excited we are, the more vulnerable we may be. So, how can we protect ourselves? What are some basic things we can safeguard our minds with?
Well, Paul, there are several steps we can take. First, we can educate ourselves on the common tactics used by scammers. Second, we can be cautious when receiving unsolicited calls or emails. And third, we can always verify the legitimacy of a request before giving out personal information or sending money.
Ah, yes, that's very wise, Dan. You're totally right. It's very important that we all take necessary precautions to protect ourselves.
Absolutely, Paul. We should also remember to report any suspicious activity to the appropriate authorities, such as the Federal Trade Commission, the FBI, or local law enforcement.
Exactly so. This is something I feel strongly about. There are a great deal of agencies and organizations that are out there to help. We just have to reach out. Of course, those organizations can only do as much as they're empowered to, which is what we'll be getting into next. All right, Dan, thank you for diving deep into this subject. Hopefully, the folks at home can take this information and use it to protect themselves. All right, now it's time for our final segment of the day, folks. We've covered a lot of ground today, from the psychology of scammers to protecting seniors from scams. Let's pivot a bit now. What about political action against scammers? Dan, what can politicians do to protect citizens from scams?
Well, Paul, there are a few things that politicians can do to combat scams. One of the most important is passing legislation and regulation to crack down on scammers. For example, Congress recently passed the Traced Act, which gives the FCC more power to combat robocalls and other forms of phone fraud.
Okay, that's a good start, and it's great to hear. But are there any other examples of successful political action against scammers?
Yes, there are. In 2018, the Federal Trade Commission, or FTC, shut down a major tech support scam operation that had been defrauding consumers out of millions of dollars. The operation was shut down thanks to a joint effort by the FTC and law enforcement agencies in the United States as well as in India.
Okay, good. But that's already 5 years ago now. What can we do to encourage politicians to prioritize more anti scam initiatives right now?
Well, just this year, the Stop Senior Scams Act was passed by Congress, but I agree, more has to be done. In addition to passing laws, we can encourage politicians to prioritize anti scam initiatives and make sure that laws already on the books are given resources for enforcement. Our listeners can do this by contacting their representatives and expressing their concerns about scams and fraud. Remember, they work for you. Let them know how to earn your vote and how to keep earning it.
That's great advice, Dan. Remember, folks, elections matter. And it's also important to remember that scams don't just affect individuals. They can have a big impact on businesses and the economy as a whole. It's a society-wide problem.
Absolutely, Paul. Scams can cause real harm to all of us. And it's up to all of us, particularly our elected officials, to take action to protect ourselves and our communities.
That is sage advice for the ages, my friend. I wish we could dig deeper. Unfortunately, we are out of time for today. So we're going to have to pick up on this next time. Folks, this has been the Antiscam Report. Thank you all for joining us, and we hope you found today's episode informative and helpful in protecting yourself against scammers.
Remember, scammers are constantly evolving their tactics, so it's important to stay informed and stay vigilant. Make sure to share what you've learned today with your friends and family to help protect them as well.
And of course, if you have any questions, feedback, or suggestions for future episodes, feel free to reach out to us on Twitter, Facebook, our website, or reach out below in the comments. We'd love to hear from you.
And don't forget, we are a people-powered organization, so your donations are crucial in helping us continue our mission of stopping scammers. Please join the Anti-Scam Army and donate on our website at www.antiscampack.com/donate.
Thanks again for listening. And until next time, this is Paul the Bulldog and Dan signing off.
Stay safe out there, folks.
And as always, this communication has been brought to you, in part or in whole, by Antiscam. Antiscam, Act Now to Interrupt Senior Credit Asset Misappropriation, is a non-partisan political action committee and 527 organization registered with the FEC. Please visit us online to learn more. www.antiscam.click.